Barbie Night is gone, erased completely from the Chicago Sky's 2026 promotional calendar, not postponed, not quietly rebranded, not moved to a different slot in the schedule, permanently deleted. And when a professional sports franchise actively removes the one themed promotional event that was built entirely around their marquee player's personal brand identity, that is not an administrative adjustment. That is a declaration, a deliberate, highly visible signal to every agent, every rival executive, and every free agent in the league that the front office has already made its internal decision. And they made it months before the news cycle even knew to ask the question. What you are about to hear is the complete story of how Angel Reese went from the WNBA's most aggressively marketed rookie to an asset her own organization is actively working to move before the 2026 season opens. And here is why this story matters specifically to anyone following Caitlin Clark's path through this league. Angel Reese was the WNBA's primary rivalry narrative. She was the other name in the headline. The face that was systematically positioned as Clark's competitive counterpart from the moment they both entered the draft in 2024. That rivalry was the engine behind the WNBA's mainstream breakthrough, and right now, that engine is burning from the inside out. If this kind of layered investigation is what you showed up for, hit that like button right now. It sends this breakdown to the people who are actually paying attention rather than consuming whatever the algorithm serves them. Let's establish the full timeline of events, because this collapse did not happen overnight. It built through a specific chain of decisions that the Chicago Sky front office documented, evaluated, and has been acting on ever since. Late in the previous regular season, the Chicago Sky were in a genuinely desperate organizational position. They were fighting to hold the final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference during a stretch that carried real financial consequences. WNBA playoff appearances generate meaningful revenue, premium ticket pricing, expanded local broadcast multipliers, additional sponsorship activation windows that don't exist in a regular season context. For a franchise still building its long-term financial base, missing the postseason isn't just a competitive disappointment. It's an organizational crisis measured in actual dollars. Right in the middle of that high-stakes stretch, Angel Reese made a professional decision that front offices never stop referencing. She went directly to the Chicago Tribune, bypassing the coaching staff, bypassing the communications department, bypassing the executive suite entirely, and publicly criticized the direction of her own roster. Her comments implicitly targeted veteran teammates, including players like Courtney Vandersloot and Ariel Atkins, championship-level professionals who had built their reputations on consistency and competitive excellence. She aired internal locker room frustration to the local press while her team was scraping for its playoff life in one of the most financially sensitive stretches of the organization's recent history. In any professional setting, that decision has a classification: insubordination. You do not take internal grievances public during a critical stretch drive. You do not undercut veterans who have built careers on accountability. And you absolutely do not do it in a market like Chicago, where the media environment amplifies every word and where every executive in that building reads everything that gets published about their franchise. The Chicago Sky's response was immediate and formal. They suspended Reese, benching her for the first half of a critical game. That move was not merely disciplinary, it was documented. It was a front office drawing a clear professional boundary and recording, officially, that the boundary had been crossed. In professional sports, documentation matters for everything that comes next: contracts, trades, conversations with rival GMs, and every future organizational decision involving that player's name. Most professionals, at that point, take the medicine. They serve the suspension, they return in the second half, they compete, and they let performance begin the slow work of rebuilding trust. The incident becomes a difficult but survivable chapter. Angel Reese chose a different path. When the second half of that game began, after the disciplinary period was fully served, she refused to enter. Not physically unable, not injured. She declined to fulfill the professional obligations she is contractually required to perform. Her teammates were on the floor. Her team was in a game that mattered enormously for the organization's financial situation, and she stayed off it by choice. That specific refusal is the moment this situation became structurally unrecoverable. A poorly timed media comment is something a front office can manage. A suspension, even a public one, is something a player can move past with accountability and sustained performance. But actively refusing to play when your team needs you, after the formal disciplinary period has already ended, communicates something about professional character that brand value and follower counts cannot compensate for. Every executive in that building processed that message in real time, and they haven't stopped processing it since. Then came the season-ending back injury announcement. Back injuries are legitimate and serious. Athletes sustain them regularly, and any individual situation deserves its own medical context before conclusions are drawn. On its own, the timing of the announcement would have been awkward, but ultimately defensible. Except footage emerged almost immediately. Video showing Reese on a private jet to Las Vegas, dancing, visibly celebrating, in noticeably high spirits, circulated widely across social media while the Chicago Sky were competing short-handed in games she was listed as physically unable to participate in. The gap between a season-ending back injury and what that footage documented is not a minor discrepancy. It is the kind of sequence that a general manager files permanently in institutional memory and references at every subsequent decision point. In contract negotiations, in trade conversations, in draft evaluations, and in every organizational discussion where a player's professional reliability is on the table. Every front office in the league has access to social media. Every rival executive watched that footage. And Jeff Pagliuca, the Chicago Sky's general manager, watched all of it. He did not need to announce publicly what he intended to do with the information. He would demonstrate it through organizational decisions. Decisions exactly like a promotional calendar. To understand why this situation carries implications that extend far beyond one player's roster status, you need to understand what the Clark-Reese dynamic was actually designed to accomplish for the WNBA as an institution. When Caitlin Clark was selected second overall by the Indiana Fever in the 2024 WNBA draft, and Angel Reese was selected seventh by the Chicago Sky, the league had its narrative engine. These two players carried genuine, nationally televised competitive history. The 2023 NCAA championship game between LSU and Iowa generated more media attention than most complete WNBA seasons had produced in total. The in-game exchange between Reese and Clark during that game introduced millions of casual American sports fans to women's basketball in a way that years of sustained marketing had failed to accomplish. Fans had strong opinions, they had sides, and they were paying attention in numbers the league hadn't seen. The WNBA's marketing machinery moved aggressively around that dynamic. Broadcast partners built scheduling strategy around Indiana Fever versus Chicago Sky matchups. Sponsors activated campaigns around both players simultaneously. Reese's Nike deal and the Barbie promotional partnership positioned her as a cultural presence extending well beyond basketball. Ticket prices for Clark-Reese head-to-head appearances climbed to previously unprecedented levels for women's basketball. For the first time in the league's recent memory, casual sports fans across America had a women's basketball storyline they were actively following between game days. And that storyline had two names attached to it, both of those names, which is what makes what's happening in Chicago right now so consequential for the league's broader competitive architecture. The Barbie Night cancellation is the front office's clearest public confirmation that the dismantling is already well underway. Last season, that promotional night was the marquee event on the Sky's home schedule, a full brand activation built around Reese's personal identity, designed to convert her social media audience into paying ticket holders inside the arena. The franchise invested real resources into it: merchandise partnerships, event infrastructure, promotional spend. This year, that event appears nowhere in the published promotional calendar. Women's Cancer Awareness Night, World Culture Night, Pride Night, and Marvel Superhero Day are all present. Barbie Night is absent entirely, and critically. The front office had actual attendance data informing that decision. Reports from Barbie-branded promotional events connected to Reese's brand pointed to a significant gap between digital engagement numbers and physical consumer demand at the gate. There is a fundamental difference between a player who accumulates social media followers and a player who drives ticket buyers through a turnstile. One of those metrics funds arena operations. The other looks impressive in a brand presentation. The Chicago front office appears to have drawn its own conclusion about which category applies, and their promotional calendar now reflects that conclusion in the most public way possible, short of holding a press conference. Before we get into what the front office does next and exactly where this leaves Caitlin Clark's competitive landscape heading into 2026, drop your call in the comments. Does Angel Reese get traded before opening night? Or does this situation drag into the regular season and become the league's loudest ongoing storyline? The comment section on this video is going to run hot. Let's hear your actual read on how this plays out. Now let's talk about the single most revealing moment in this entire offseason narrative, because it was buried inside a quote that most mainstream coverage completely misread. When Jeff Pagliuca was asked directly about his relationship with Angel Reese heading into 2026, his response was precise to the point of being surgical. He stated that she is on the roster until he hears differently. Read that slowly. Until he hears differently. That is not a general manager expressing confidence in his franchise cornerstone. That is not an organizational leader defending a player he believes in for the long haul. That is the exact phrasing a corporate executive uses when negotiations are already happening that haven't yet been finalized. Until he hears differently means conversations are occurring. It means calls are being made. It means offers are being evaluated and counteroffers are being considered. Pagliuca walked into a press conference, handed every rival GM in the league a classified internal memo, and the framing was so controlled and neutral that most coverage treated it as a non-answer. It wasn't a non-answer, it was the answer, phrased with just enough plausible deniability to avoid burning the trade value of a player he's actively working to move. Real quick, if this channel has been your primary source for the analysis that goes underneath the official narrative rather than repeating it, consider joining as a member. Hit that join button below. Every member directly supports the research that makes this kind of breakdown possible, and it's what keeps us going deeper than the surface-level coverage. The free agency dimension is where the immediate organizational pain is most concentrated, and it's where the new CBA changes everything about the calculus. The collective bargaining agreement has dramatically restructured WNBA salary parameters. The team salary cap ceiling has risen to approximately $7 million. That is real money generating real leverage for elite unrestricted free agents who previously had very limited financial power. Supermax-level contracts are now entering WNBA conversations that simply couldn't have happened under the previous financial structure. And players who have genuine options are making destination decisions based on meaningful criteria: roster quality, organizational track record, coaching stability, and, critically, locker room culture. The Chicago Sky spent last season generating a documented, very public narrative about a veteran player being undercut in the press by their highest-profile roster member, about a second-half walkout following a suspension, about a suspicious injury timeline followed immediately by highly visible social media footage. Multiple outlets are reporting that this record has registered loudly in the private conversations that free agents and their representatives conduct during evaluation season. Players with real options are gravitating toward organizations that demonstrate stability and accountability. What Chicago demonstrated last season represents the operational opposite of that, and the free agency market is quietly pricing in that reality. And if you've been following this situation, and you know someone whose only view of the WNBA comes through the mainstream sports cycle, share this video with them right now. The context here is exactly what the surface-level coverage keeps burying. pass it along. The draft complication layers directly on top of the free agency problem. The Chicago Sky hold a valuable lottery selection in the upcoming WNBA draft, which should theoretically make them an attractive destination for elite collegiate prospects. But multiple reports have surfaced suggesting that top-tier prospects are actively factoring the Chicago locker room's recent reputation into their draft preferences. We are getting into confirmed rumor territory here. Sources suggest that elite prospects, including names like Flash Johnson, are aware of last season's dynamics and are weighing whether Chicago represents a development environment that actually serves their early professional trajectory. Prospects with the most options tend to move toward organizations with demonstrated accountability cultures. What the Sky demonstrated last season does not obviously qualify as one. This creates a genuine organizational catch-22 that the front office is acutely aware of. A premium lottery pick is supposed to be leverage. A premium lottery pick that coveted prospects are privately hoping to avoid is something closer to its opposite. Chicago needs to resolve the Reese situation before it further shapes the draft class's perception of the franchise as a destination. So where does this actually end, and where does Reese land? Multiple sources are whispering about expansion destinations as the most structurally logical outcome, with Portland and Toronto representing the natural conversation partners in any trade discussion. Expansion general managers operate under a very specific mandate. They need recognizable names to sell tickets in new markets. They need players who generate media attention regardless of competitive situation, and they need to build rosters quickly without the institutional history of established franchises. Angel Reese, whatever her professional complications, carries genuine name recognition that an expansion organization can credibly monetize. Not officially confirmed, but the breadcrumbs lead toward Chicago having initiated at least preliminary conversations with expansion front offices to gauge interest and evaluate what a trade structure might actually look like. The structural challenge is that the same behavioral record pushing Chicago to move Reese is the same record giving any acquiring GM genuine pause. Expansion teams are not immune to locker room chemistry concerns. They're arguably more sensitive to them because they lack the veteran leadership depth that established organizations use to absorb the cost of difficult personalities. Any trade involving Reese is almost certainly going to require protections built into the structure that reflect the acquiring team's understanding of what they're inheriting alongside the brand name. That negotiation complexity is part of why the move hasn't already been announced. For Reese personally, a move to Portland or Toronto represents a genuine professional reset opportunity, new market, new teammates, no institutional memory of last season's events embedded in every interaction. Whether that reset produces different professional outcomes, or whether the patterns that define the Chicago situation emerge again in a new environment, is the defining open question of the next phase of her career. That answer doesn't exist yet. It won't exist until she's actually operating inside a new organizational structure with new expectations and new accountability frameworks in place. Here's the angle that almost no coverage is addressing directly. What does the WNBA's broader competitive narrative actually look like if the Clark-Reese rivalry is effectively dismantled before the 2026 season tips off? The league invested 2 years building that dynamic as its primary mainstream hook. Network partners structured scheduling around it. Sponsors ran dual-player campaigns calibrated to both names simultaneously. Casual fans who discovered the WNBA through that rivalry in 2024 now follow a league that may be operating without its central two-player narrative engine for the first time since that engine was ignited. For Caitlin Clark specifically, the on-court competitive picture doesn't change. Her ability to elevate the Indiana Fever's entire organizational trajectory, drive record attendance at arenas across the league, and generate broadcast numbers that were previously unthinkable for women's basketball has been established on its own terms, independent of any rivalry framing. But the marketing infrastructure that positioned her as one half of a generational competition now needs its next story, Multiple sources are suggesting that the league's narrative apparatus is quietly pivoting toward Clark and Napheesa Collier as the primary competitive dynamic heading forward. Fever versus Lynx, Indiana versus Minnesota, with Collier and a legitimate championship-caliber organization representing the kind of sustained, credible, competitive challenge that the Reese situation never fully delivered where it matters most, on the actual basketball court. Not officially confirmed by the league, and no formal reframing has been announced, but the breadcrumbs are pointing in that direction, and the scheduling decisions for 2026 will tell you a great deal about whether that pivot is deliberate or coincidental. Here is what ties every piece of this together in a way that extends beyond Angel Reese's individual situation. The new CBA has fundamentally altered the financial accountability structure of the entire WNBA. When salary caps were lower and franchise economics were thinner, organizations could absorb the cost of protecting a highly marketed player from the full professional consequences of their own decisions. That financial cushion no longer exists. $7 million salary cap ceilings mean that every roster spot carries genuine economic weight. Every locker room dynamic directly affects free agent recruitment value, and every organizational decision is being made under financial stakes that did not exist in the previous structure. Angel Reese's situation is the most visible early data point in what is now a new accountability era for the league. Front offices operating under expanded CBA financials cannot afford to manage around dysfunction that costs them free agents, poisons draft class perception, and eliminates promotional revenue streams. The economic calculation has permanently shifted, and this is what that shift looks like when it reaches a front office decision point in real time. The Chicago Sky's 2026 season has not started yet, but its organizational shape is already being determined in the meetings and conversations that happen parallel to the games. Pagliuca's quote has been delivered. The promotional calendar has been published. The free agency market has already processed the signal. And wherever Angel Reese is playing when the 2026 season opens, whether that's Portland, Toronto, or a deal that hasn't surfaced yet, the Chicago chapter of this specific story is effectively closed. For Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever, the Eastern Conference is reshuffling in ways that expand Indiana's competitive window considerably. For the league, its primary rivalry narrative is in transition and actively searching for its next engine. And for everyone tracking the WNBA's business layer as closely as the basketball itself, the next several months are going to move faster than people expect. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so this channel stays in your feed when the next major move drops. The Angel Reese situation is one chapter. The Chicago rebuild, the expansion franchises entering the competitive landscape, and the structural shift in Clark's Eastern Conference world. That is the chapter we are about to start reading together. Stay locked in. I'll see you in the next one.